great start to Journalism Week to have Jeff with us. And I had the pleasure of working with Jeff first in the 1980s when we were both at Radio Tees, and Jeff was sports editor. Since then, he's become one of the most respected and trusted sports journalists in the country. For 5 successive years, he's been named Sports Broadcaster of the Year by the Sports Journalists Association, and there's no greater accolade than that given by your peers, so that's an incredible achievement. His job's taken him all over the world to see some of the most incredible sports events and to see some of the most beautiful sights in the world, not least Rachel Riley from the Countdown Studio. And he gets paid for it. Jeff Stelling.
I should say, sports editor at Radio Tees with a staff of 9. Okay. It's a fantastic turnout. Thanks for coming, first of all. Thanks for asking me here today as well. Those of you who don't maybe know quite what I do, I present a show called Gillette Soccer Saturday, principally, which is a football show. You know, football, you don't see any goals, you don't see any shots, you don't see any near misses. So it's very much like watching Leeds United, I suppose. We have a panel of experts telling you what you miss. And I've been lucky enough over the years to work with some of my great heroes. George Best, who I know concedes all your time, but was the greatest footballer that I ever saw. He wasn't really the greatest pundit in the world, in the sense that his reliability didn't match his ability. So we were the first football show actually to have a substitute, because we were never sure that George would turn up. In fact, some days we were sure he wouldn't turn up. I remember one day seeing a story on the front page of the Daily Mail on a Saturday morning, and the gist of that story was that George had spent the night on the town in London. He'd gone back to his hotel room with a couple of ladies of the night, shall we say. And while he was sleeping, they stole £2,000 from him. So he didn't show that day, and I said, George can't be with us today, he's not feeling too grand. And he wasn't. George used to sit next to Rodney Marsh, who was, you know, I mean, Rodney was the spikiest character you've ever seen, really. I was often asked why people took an instant dislike to him, and I used to tell them it saved time. He's the sort of guy who invented one-upmanship, you know, if you did a technique, you did whatever, that sort of thing. But there were people like Frank McClintock, David Ginola, and nowadays, of course, we've got the former Liverpool captain, lifted the European Cup, Phil Thompson, Matt Le Tissier, made more than 1,000 appearances, all of Kentucky Fried Chicken, unfortunately. My sporting heroes, and you know, I'm a council houseboy from Hartlepool, and sometimes ask myself how it all happened. So this basically is my story and the lessons I've learned along the way, and at the end of it, you know, hopefully if you've got any questions, just fire away. I mean, you've obviously all decided you want to be journalists, and that's fantastic. I loved every minute of it. I always wanted to be a journalist. It was my only ambition at school. And people come along and they tell you, you know, I was hopeless at school, and you know they weren't. You know they were the SWAT. I was hopeless at school. And just to prove that, I brought one of my own reports there. And just a quick assessment: German, rather disappointing. Mathematics, fair. Chemistry, poor, much more effort required. Physics, rather weak. Physical education, only fair. Position in class, 28th out of 34. You know, I was hopeless, basically, going nowhere. And I remember my headmaster used to do an annual interview. It was a thing that he feared because he was, his name was E.N. Houghton, or we just called him Nobby Houghton. He was Dickensian sort of character. He was pencil thin, white as a sheet, small, rimless specs, black cloak, always carried a cane in his hand. And one day he called me in and said, "So, Stelling," he said, "you want to be a journalist?" So you right, Mr. Houghton? Yes, I do want to be a journalist. He said, "You enjoy prying into people's private lives. You enjoy stories, gossip. You want to look behind people's curtains into their homes. And I thought, he's not seen the Hartlepool Vale. But nevertheless, it encouraged me. I mean, I was determined that was all I was going to do. And that's when I started my career at the Hartlepool Mail. And it was a fantastic grounding. You know, I know people look at great God television and things like that now, but if you get the chance to work for a local newspaper, you grab their hand because it's the sort of place where I would do Crown Court, Magistrates Court, County Court. For a while, my aim was to be a court reporter, especially when you're dealing, you know, in the biggest courts, in the Crown Courts, doing murder trials and such. That was absolutely fantastic. You know, you'd sit in on council meetings. You'd learn to ask questions. You'd learn to make contact. You'd go out. You'd meet the local police. You know, you'd meet the local landlord, which is often a lot more enjoyable than meeting the local police. You'd meet the local postmistress. Anybody who might have a little story for you somewhere along the line. You'd nurture contact. You'd learn to be a journalist. You'd learn to ask questions. It was a fantastic grounding. But I was lucky because in those days, and Mike would tell you that, we were in at the birth of local radio. And there were so many more opportunities now, then rather, than you'll find now out there. You'll find it a lot tougher. When I first joined Radio Tees, I had no broadcasting experience at all. Within the first week, I was presenting news bulletins live on air. We worked in a newsroom which had maybe 10 people at the time. It's not like that anymore. The numbers are vastly reduced. So I was fortunate in that sense. I was fortunate too in the quality of people that were involved then. Mark Mardell was in the newsroom then, who's now BBC News Washington correspondent. There's a guy called John Andrew who went on to work for BBC TV News. He filled a whole range of jobs. Home Affairs correspondent was one of his jobs. We had a living forward David Siemens and Kent Barker. May not mean anything to you at the moment, but they all went on to work for the Radio 4 Today programme. Ruth Pitt, who became an award-winning documentary maker. Helen Bowden, who went on to be a high-powered person at the BBC, who in the news a lot recently, of course. So, real quality of people there, which was absolutely fantastic. And you got opportunities. My first opportunity was where I made my first step into sport. And it was a sort of bizarre situation. I've been there for 2 weeks. And I tell you how long ago it was. I was playing football on a Saturday morning and I got a telegram. Telegrams existed in those days. And that telegram said, go to Welland Road immediately, report on Leeds v Middlesbrough, which was a top flight game in those days. And so I thought, oh, fantastic, I'll do that. I'm thinking, how will I do that? I haven't got a car. So I rang my then girlfriend and said, how about an afternoon shopping in Leeds? She had a car. She didn't realise that she was doing the shopping and I was going to football. But you get there, it's a steep learning curve because, you know, I was dropped off at Ellen Road and I thought, great, how do I get in? You know, and they said they leave us a ticket, but all I could see were queues. I didn't know about press entrances and things like that. Eventually get into the ground, and in those days all communication was done by telephone. Where are the telephones? You know, things that you just don't know. So I relied on some old hacks at the Evening Gazette to help me out, and they were absolutely fantastic. And that was it. You know, that was 2 weeks into my radio career. I'd done my first football match in terms of reporting, and it was the first step, like, away from news towards sport. But I mentioned that, you know, I was lucky in a lot of ways at the time. But there were other differences. In those days, regional accents were not in favour at all. I mean, nowadays it's a positive benefit, I think, in broadcasting to have an accent. But in those days it was very much, you know, the BBC accent or nothing. But when I went to London eventually, I remember my boss at LBC IRN, then was a guy called Mike Lewis, and he showed me a letter he got one day from somebody saying, where did you get this new sports presenter from? We can't understand a word that he says. And Mike Lewis wrote back defending me and said, I'm sure you would agree that in this day and age, regional accents should be encouraged. But our correspondent wrote back and determined to have the final word, and he said, yeah, he said, regional accents are to be encouraged, but speech defects should not. So, you know, it wasn't always easy in those days.